Do you consider yourself a border scholar? Can you please elaborate for 1 minute what kind of borders do you study?
Yeah, I think I would consider myself a border scholar. The work that I do is very interdisciplinary. I work quite a lot with European integration, for example, as well. But my main interest relies with borders. And the borders that I study are primarily within the Baltics and also in the Nordics. I focus quite a lot on, by now, the external border of the EU in this part of the world. So a lot of it relates to Russia as well. But I also do a fair bit of work on the European Eastern neighborhood, so basically across all of Eastern Europe.
I consider myself as a borderlander. I come from a border region, and I was born and brought up in a border region, and I've been studying borders from that perspective, from a lived experience, living in a border region. And therefore I feel that, a lot of my work is based on, like, in a bioregion in the Eastern Himalayas. And I study environmental borders, ecological borders, and as to the worldviews of communities on borders, how the differences between how nation states look at borders and how local communities look at borders, the different worldviews.
I'm studying the Cypriot border, if you will. Calling it a border is a bit of a political thing, but I'm not saying it as a political statement. It's de facto what it feels like. And so it's a border between an unrecognized state and the state it's seceded from. I've also been studying the border between the patron state or the sponsor state, which is Turkey, and North Cyprus a little bit. So that has been my main focus within the field of border studies as well as peace studies. I usually look at unrecognized states issues. Originally, I went from political science to peace studies, and that's what I teach. But increasingly, I have focused on the effects of borders on people's society and psychology, and its relations to how they conduct themselves in conflicts and potential for building peace. So increasingly, I'm in the process of becoming. I'm learning a lot, and this is why I love these conferences, because I get to hear what other people are thinking from different grounds.
I'm quite new to border studies. My background is in philosophy, and I very much consider myself a feminist philosopher and an interdisciplinary scholar. But it so happened that I do study particular border, which is the border between Poland and Belarus, the area of a primeval heritage forest between those two countries that is a borderland in many different senses.
I am from Kerala, extreme south of India, and from a small coastal village. So what happens usually, fishing communities are studied in relation with mainland people. So this, what I am thinking is importance of this border study will highlight how the policing and other things is happening at the ocean. So there is constantly this idea of there is an anticipated checkpost in the ocean. That's my paper about.
I wouldn't precisely label myself as a border scholar, but it happens that I've been researching borders for quite some time. And in my PhD, we basically investigate weaponized environments, but we do draw the borders around those weaponized environments, and we visualize such environments and map their borders. And specifically, it's between the border between Lebanon and Israel that we study, and we map those invisible borders, if you want to call them, of the weaponized environments and where they are, how they function, and what medium do they affect.
I'm working on the non-human border right now, so I'm traced. My project is on tracing the cattle tails and the trail that they cross the border. So in that way, I could see like how the non-human movement shape the border and the border dynamics. In the same time, how the border also shape their mobilities too, right? In which, like, as a human, we also have faced the checkpoint and also some control over the border, like what happening to this non-human movement, like cattle and other livestock that is crossing the border, how the border do to their life.
currently I'm into border studies, but to begin with, I did not start my academic journey as a border scholar. I was, or rather, I'm still a geographer by training, and I have been studying Himalayan ecology. But my work brought me to the borders, and then I realized that I need to negotiate the borders on almost daily basis, the different dimensions of it, and I found that there are very few people who are talking from the borders. And that's how my border studies journey started. Now I'm full-fledged into border studies. I study India-China border. So I'm based in Sikkim in India, and I primarily look into the Sikkim sector of Indian Himalaya and the Himachal sector, which is in the Western Himalaya, and Sikkim in the Eastern Himalaya. So these are the two borders which I primarily look into. Apart from that, I do some bit of Indo-Bangladesh border studies as well.
I am a researcher here at Tulane University, and my research looks at borders and Southeast Asia. For a long time, I was doing research and studying border areas, and only recently did I start to self-identify as someone interested in border studies. I'm interested in bordering and attempts to regulate the flow of illicit goods, and what's interesting to me is how efforts to stop the flows can somehow have unintended consequences and lead them to increase.
Border studies is not at the top of my list. I'm trained as a specialist of China and Central Asia. That being said, the type of inquiries that I'm interested in, the movement of people, the movement of goods, capital, information, is inherently in conversation with border studies. So another way of putting this is that in the work that I do in the critical social sciences, the methodologies that I deploy, I have to engage with bordering, I have to engage with questions of transnationalism, the way in which they shape our contemporary world. So in that sense, I end up becoming a scholar of border studies. And I think that would be the case for many people who are in border studies these days. So our secondary, tertiary specialization would end up becoming in border studies, but we come to it through another primary specialization.
What kind of practitioners do you work with outside academia?
Outside of academia, I usually work with a lot of activists and artivists, as they call themselves. So people who use art to change or, kind of advocate for peace. And then a lot of activists who are engaging people on the ground, organizers, people who go into protests, or people who work with civil societies and NGOs. Many a time, those are the people I end up engaging with outside of academia. Occasionally, I have talked with politicians and diplomats, but my preferred audience is the former, I must admit.
So in terms of the work that I do for example, my dissertation, I don't necessarily work very extensively with practitioners outside of academia, but for some more personal interests, I do have contacts with the civil society in Sweden, particularly women's peace organizations in Sweden, and they're quite interested in recent questions on borders in Sweden with the Swedish NATO application.
Local communities and trying to actually document their worldviews on how they look at borders, how they straddle borders, how they navigate them, how they negotiate them on a daily basis. And that is what I'm studying over a period of time.
I think with art, a lot of the times, I think it's very inspirational for thinking, for opening other ideas that perhaps we can't really get from strictly academic work. I also do interviews and draw on the work of scientists, so particularly biologists and conservation scientists, because I work with this heritage forest that is a biodiversity hub. So it's important for me to also look at the natural environment and processes as both an inspiration for thinking, but also a deeper understanding of a space that I'm entering.
Mostly the local communities and the security forces, because once you are in and around the border area, there are various kind of formalities which you need to take care of, and the access to the border area, because that part of the world, the borders are quite securitized.
We also working with the cattle traders, who also the practitioner. They're also crossing border all the time. They're also taking care of the animal. In my project, we're also working with the professional veterinarian, who's also taking care of these cattle, like investigate on their disease control, like whether this animal will be potential virus carrier. So actually, it's also interesting in a way, like how the professional worker, like the veterinary, deal with this cattle trader. Also, the understanding or mutual understanding of disease. Control of the disease, the vaccination, how the knowledge was transferred to the practitioner who is outside this academic thing.
When I went into academia, I didn't think that I would be engaging with practitioners outside of the academy, but given the nature of the work that I do, which is focused on China, on Central Asia, more broadly speaking, contemporary international issues, one ends up producing research that has relevance as far as the policymaking community is concerned. It is of some interest to journalists as well. So in the limited engagement that I do outside of the academy, I would say that it's the work that's speaking to people in the policymaking community, people in journalism. Some of the time that's translated and mediated through myself. At other times, it's the work that's doing the talking.
So far, we've been working with environmentalists and with journalists mainly, because what we're investigating is very close to like investigative journalism and uncovering some mediums that are invisible in this area, and basically we're closely related to the fields of journalism and environmentalists, and anything like it's case by case also. So once this case needs or warrants a specific profession, we seek this person. Like whether it's like one of the cases we worked with where we analyzed soil composition, so we had to go to the right person for that and to the right lab to analyze the soil particles. So it's based on each case, but it's quite interdisciplinary, I would say.
Journalists, civil society, organizations, policymakers, if they're interested.
Do you think that border studies are different in Europe and in Asia?
Europe borders are more or less stabilized, so to say. But in Asia, it is every day built up. It is every day navigated, and it's also in many ways unequal and many ways violent. And that is why also how there are a lot of precarities involved in how borders are looked at Asia, and I think border studies as a discipline, I feel that Asia has been a bit neglected in the border studies scholarship. So I think we are also together engaged in actually bringing Asia to the larger domain of border studies, which is a very north-centric kind of a discipline.
On the top of my head, I would expect there to be a difference. I think borders studies has been very Eurocentric or Anglo-centric. So I think that when you expand a research area kind of past where it originated, of course it's going to change. But I think it is a good change. I think it's a needed change because it's going to add a lot of new ideas and perspectives to the research area.
European borders have a different kind of security concern, and most of the European borders are the soft borders. Or if at all, if it is a hard border, it's a hard border, not for everyone. But the Asian borders are mostly it's hard borders, and getting across the border is quite different in the scenario, and it's quite difficult. So the border studies also is quite different in Asia. Plus, it's a relatively new area of academic engagement, whereas in the West, border studies is much more developed.
I'm not trained as a specialist of Europe, so I'm going to demur on the Europe part of the question. Border studies in Asia, I would say, are increasingly influenced by the role of two very large, very significant geopolitical actors. These are China and India. And a lot of the conversations that are happening in the field of border studies a lot of these conversations are based upon empirical case studies in which scholars, experts, people coming back from the field with insights are at some level trying to understand the role of these two states. So by virtue of the fact that you have the two most populist states in the world in Asia, I would say that border studies would be inherently different for purely geopolitical reasons and the fact that you have these two major global actors in Asia at this point in time. Europe, of course, has its own dynamics.
I see some similarities and also I see some differences. Like, well, when I experience the border in Asia, it's more quite porous. For the like that the border is not much demarcated, right? And then the people would just used to be their kin. They also be the same ethnicity. They used to cross the border, and this is kind of like the demarcation of the border is very much state-centric, produced and projected on the people themselves there. But when I moved to the non-human border, then actually I kind of like seeing the same similarity in a way that here at the border of Europe, you also cannot bring any products that is content, like pigs, pork, or when you want to bring something cross the airport, you have to declare whether it is free from the disease. Those kind of things is also projected in the Asia border as well. So I think for me it's very interesting how this shifting of the border like towards more biosecurity, more like control of this disease, free of this disease, seeing disease as a part of the threatening, and that actually kind of like producing a new understanding of the border in that way. So from the porous border where the Asia become more control, more concerned about biosecurity. In the same time, Europe also doing that in the same thing. Also with European border that is more strict to the refugee, more strict to the undocumented migrant workers, right? That they use the technology to control them, the facial recognition, those kind of things kind of like reflecting and make me think a lot about how border works to both human and non-human in the same time.
I think this conference, which is about bridging not only disciplines but also regions, I think it shows that definitely bringing these different contexts into a dialogue is very productive. And in that sense, I think that there is something very inspiring about scholars who work on very different places, different parts of the world coming together and having these conversations. And ultimately, we are living in a global reality. So I think it's very important that these conversations about borders and bordering, that they also happen in this transdisciplinary but also transregional context.